I said the words were over in front of 11 people, 3 bridesmaids, a groom who still owed me $40 from college, and one open bar. I said them clearly, calmly, like a man reading a weather report. And then Derek Voss, best man, 6'2", teeth like a toothpaste commercial, put his hand on Marley Quinn's shoulder like he'd been waiting all weekend for permission. That was the second my whole plan caught fire. Not the good kind of fire either. Not the kind you warm your hands over. The kind that takes the barn down with it. My name is Nate Calloway. I was 30 years old, a general contractor who spent his days arguing with subfloors and his nights pretending he didn't have a single soft feeling in his entire body. I built decks. I framed additions. I told myself, very seriously, that I was a practical man who did not do dramatic things. And yet there I was, standing on a hotel patio in the mountains of North Carolina, having just publicly announced the end of a relationship that had never actually started, watching another man's hand land on the shoulder of the woman I apparently could not stop thinking about, and feeling something in my chest go off like a nail gun with the safety disengaged. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense unless you understand how a man ends up faking a breakup from a fake relationship, which, if you say it out loud, sounds like the setup to a bad sitcom. It felt a lot less funny living inside it. Marley Quinn had been my neighbor for 4 years and my best friend for 3 of them. She ran a little flower shop downtown called Thistle and Bloom, the kind of place that smelled like rain and peonies even in the dead of winter. She had loud opinions about quiet things, freckles across her nose that multiplied every summer, and a laugh that made strangers in coffee shops turn around and smile like they'd been personally included in the joke. She also had history. Bad history, wearing a very good suit, currently getting married in a mountain resort 40 minutes from where I was standing when this all started. Grant Ashford, Marley's ex. Not a villain exactly, which somehow made it worse. He hadn't cheated. He hadn't yelled. He had simply, over the course of 2 years, made Marley smaller. Quieter opinions. Quieter laugh. He liked her best when she agreed with him, and by the end she'd forgotten how loud she used to be before him. She broke it off herself, which I respected more than almost anything I knew about her. It took her a year to get her volume back. Then, 3 weeks before this wedding, an invitation showed up in her mailbox with her name spelled correctly and a note from Grant's mother that said, "We'd love to see you there, sweetheart. No hard feelings," which is the kind of sentence that contains nothing but hard feelings. Marley showed up at my place that night holding the invitation like it was a court summons. "I can't go alone," she said, standing in my doorway in pajama pants covered in tiny cartoon tomatoes. "Everyone will do the head tilt. You know the head tilt. I don't know the head tilt. The sad one. The 'oh honey, are you doing okay' tilt. I will not survive an entire weekend of head tilts, Nate." I leaned against the doorframe. "So don't go." His mother put my name on the seating chart already. She told my mother. "My mother is already buying a hat. That's a family problem, not a you problem." Marley looked at me, and something in her face went very still, the kind of still that meant she was about to ask for something big and pretend it was small. "Come with me," she said, "as my date." Fake, obviously. We tell everyone we're together. I get through the weekend without pity, and you get an open bar and a very nice mountain view. I should have said no. Any sensible man would have said no. I had spent 3 years successfully not thinking about Marley Quinn as anything other than my best friend, a woman who borrowed my drill and never returned it, who fell asleep on my couch during bad reality television, who once cried over a dying houseplant like it had been a member of the family. I had built an entire structural system in my chest specifically designed to hold that feeling in place and not let it move. "Define fake," I said instead of no. Her whole face lit up like I'd handed her a gift. Hand-holding. A few believable looks. "You call me babe exactly enough times to seem real, but not so many times it's suspicious. That's a very specific number." I did math. "Of course you did." She grabbed both my hands, practically vibrating. "Please, Nate. I need this. I need Grant to see that I am thriving. Radiant. Aggressively fine. I looked down at her hands wrapped around mine, small and warm and familiar in a way that should not have made my pulse do what it did. One more thing, I said. If your mother asks how serious we are, what's our answer? Marley considered this with the gravity of a woman planning a heist. Serious enough that she stops asking. Not so serious, she starts planning a venue. That's a narrow window. You're a contractor. Narrow windows are your specialty. Fine, I said. But if his mother asks about our wedding colors, I'm telling her beige. Marley laughed, that big, unguarded laugh that made the whole hallway feel warmer, and threw her arms around my neck. You're the best fake boyfriend a woman could ask for. I hugged her back and thought, with the particular dread of a man realizing he'd just agreed to something dangerous, that I did not want to be her fake anything. Before any of that, though, there was the small matter of the days leading up to the wedding, which I probably should mention, because that's when the whole thing actually started tilting sideways without either of us noticing. The Tuesday after Marley asked me, I showed up at her shop after work to help her close up, which had become a habit somewhere in year 2 of our friendship without either of us deciding it on purpose. She was elbow deep in a cooler of white ranunculus, humming something off-key, wearing an apron with a coffee stain shaped vaguely like Ohio. We need a cover story, she announced the second the bell over the door stopped jingling behind me. A real one. Something with details. People ask questions, Nate. Grant's mother specifically asks questions like she's cross-examining a witness. Okay, hit me. How did we get together? I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, enjoying this more than I probably should have. I don't know. You tell me. You're the one who does the flowers for other people's love stories. You must have some ideas lying around. I do, actually. She set down her shears with the seriousness of a woman about to present a business plan. Option 1. Slow burn. Best friends who realized over time. Low risk, believable, boring. I like boring. Boring doesn't get cross-examined. Option 2. She held up a second finger, ignoring me completely. There was an incident. Something dramatic. A kitchen fire, maybe, where you heroically saved my stove and I realized my feelings in the adrenaline of the moment. There was no kitchen fire. It's fake. Nate, nobody's going to check the insurance records. I feel like your family will check the insurance records. She threw a piece of ribbon at me, which missed by a wide margin and landed on a bucket of hydrangeas. Fine. Option 3. It just happened. No big lightning bolt. One day we were friends, and the next day it felt like something else, and neither of us really remembers the exact moment it changed. I went quiet for a second too long, because that one didn't feel like fiction so much as an accurate description of a feeling I had been actively not naming for a while. That one, I said finally. Go with that one. Really? Not the kitchen fire? I had a whole story planned about the smoke detector. Save the smoke detector for our 5-year anniversary. She grinned like I'd handed her something valuable, and went back to the ranunculus, and I stood there in the cool, flower-smelling quiet of her shop and thought, not for the first time, that I liked being wherever she was more than I liked being almost anywhere else. That Thursday, 2 days before we left, she came over to my place with a laptop and a very serious expression and made me sit through what she called logistics. We need matching stories about small things, she said, perched on my kitchen counter while I made dinner. Favorite memory as a couple. First kiss. That kind of thing. If somebody asks and our answers don't match, it'll look suspicious. First kiss, I repeated, stirring a pot of something that had started as pasta and was quickly becoming an argument with itself. You want to plan a fake first kiss. I want us to agree on a fake first kiss so we don't accidentally contradict each other in front of Grant's aunt, who I happen to know keeps a mental spreadsheet. Fine. Tell me the fake first kiss. Marley thought about it, swinging her legs against the cabinets, and something in her expression shifted, softer, like she was actually considering the question instead of just building a prop for a performance. Last winter, she said slowly. The night the power went out during the storm, and we sat on your porch with the space heater and watched the whole street go dark. I remembered that night clearly. I remembered it a lot more clearly than I probably should have, given that nothing had actually happened. We'd sat wrapped in the same blanket, drinking hot chocolate out of mismatched mugs, and at some point her head had ended up on my shoulder, and I had spent 20 minutes not moving a single muscle because I didn't want her to notice how much I didn't want that moment to end. "That's a good one," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I meant it to. Nothing actually happened that night, though. For the record. "I know," Marley said, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "But it felt like something almost did. Didn't it?" I didn't answer that. I turned back to the stove and stirred the pasta that didn't need stirring, and Marley let the silence sit there instead of pushing, which was somehow worse, because it meant she'd noticed exactly as much as I had. By the time we actually got in the truck 2 days later and started up the mountain, we had an entire fabricated relationship history rehearsed and ready to deploy, complete with a fake first kiss that both of us apparently kept thinking about for reasons that had nothing to do with the fiction. The drive up to the resort took 2 hours. Marley spent the first 30 minutes narrating her rules like she was briefing me for a covert operation. "Rule 1, she said, counting on her fingers. "We arrived together. We came in the same car, which we did, so that's already accurate. Good start. I appreciate the low bar. Rule 2. Physical affection stays believable, but PG. Hand holding, arm around the waist, maybe a forehead kiss if things get desperate." "Forehead kiss is desperate?" "It's the nuclear option. We save it." "Understood. Nuclear forehead kiss, reserve only." She ignored my tone and kept going. "Rule 3, and this is the important one. If anyone asks how we got together, we say it happened slowly. Best friends who realized. It's more believable than some big dramatic thing." I glanced at her. "Slowly, huh?" "Very slowly. Excruciatingly slowly. Practically geological." I didn't say anything to that, mostly because the sentence had landed somewhere true and I didn't trust my voice not to give it away. We checked into the resort that afternoon, 1 room, 1 bed, because Marley had booked it back when she assumed we'd figure out logistics later, and later had apparently never come. She stood in the doorway of our room staring at the single queen bed like it had personally betrayed her. "I can call down and ask for a cot," she said. "It's fine. It's a small bed. It's a queen. I've slept in worse." "When?" "Once, on a job site, in the bed of my truck, during a hailstorm." "That's not the same thing." "No," I agreed, setting my bag down on the far side of the bed like a man establishing a border. "It's worse. This is a 5-star upgrade." She laughed, and some of the tension went out of her shoulders, and for one dangerous second I thought about how easy this could be. How easy it already was. The rehearsal dinner happened that night in a barn converted into something that cost more per square foot than my actual house. String lights. Long wooden tables. A band that played the kind of music people call rustic when it's really just expensive. Marley's hand found mine the moment we walked in, fingers lacing through mine like she'd done it 100 times before, which, in a way, she had. We'd held hands crossing streets, dragging each other through crowded festivals, hauling each other up hiking trails. This was different only because of what it was supposed to mean to everyone watching. "There he is," Marley murmured under her breath as we crossed the barn. I followed her gaze to a man in a gray suit standing near the head table, laughing at something with the easy confidence of a guy who had never once doubted a room liked him. Grant Ashford looked exactly like his photos. Tall, sandy-haired, the kind of handsome that photographed well and wore off slowly in person if you paid attention. He spotted Marley across the barn, and something crossed his face, quick and complicated, before he smoothed it into a smile. "Marley," he said, coming over with his hand already extending, like this was a business meeting. "You look great." "Thank you," she said, and her voice came out steady, but her hand tightened around mine hard enough that I felt it in my knuckles. Grant's eyes moved to me. "And you are?" "Nate," I said. "Marley's boyfriend." The word came out of my mouth easier than it should have. Too easy, like it had been sitting there, loaded, waiting for a reason to fire. Grant's eyebrows lifted a fraction. "Boyfriend? Didn't know you were seeing anyone." "We kept it quiet for a while," Marley said, and leaned into my side in a motion so natural it made my chest ache. Best friends first. You know how it goes. Sure, Grant said, and something behind his eyes flickered, calculating, before he arranged his face back into pleasant. Well, glad you're happy. He walked off toward the bar, and before Marley could fully exhale, his mother appeared out of nowhere the way certain mothers do, radar tuned specifically to moments of maximum social pressure. Diane Ashford wore a dress the color of a wine list and a smile that had clearly been practicing for weeks. Marley Quinn, she said, drawing the name out like she was savoring it. Look at you. And who is this handsome man? Nate Calloway, I said, extending a hand. Marley's boyfriend. Boyfriend, Diane repeated, exactly the way her son had, like the word required verification from a lab. Her eyes swept over me, taking in the suit I'd bought specifically for this weekend, the haircut Marley had insisted on 2 days earlier, the general shape of a man being evaluated for suitability. Well, isn't that lovely? And how long have you two been together? A while now, Marley said smoothly, exactly on script. We took our time. Best friends first. How sweet, Diane said, in a tone that suggested she found it only moderately sweet and mostly suspicious. And what is it you do, Nate? I'm a contractor. Renovations, additions, that sort of thing. How practical, she said, and I couldn't tell if it was a compliment or a very polite insult, which I was quickly learning was a specialty of hers. Grant always did like practical things too, before he decided he wanted excitement instead. Mom, Grant said from somewhere behind her, appearing with the exhausted patience of a man who had clearly had this exact conversation redirected many times over the years. I'm only saying, Diane said, patting my arm like we were old friends, that some women appreciate a man who fixes things instead of one who's always chasing the next big idea. Marley always did strike me as sensible that way. She's plenty of things, I said, glancing at Marley, whose jaw had gone tight in a way I recognized from every story she'd ever told me about this family. Sensible's just one of them. Diane's eyes flicked between us, something calculating and pleased crossing her face, like she'd gotten exactly the reaction she was fishing for. Well, we'll see you both at dinner. She swept off toward another cluster of guests, leaving a trail of expensive perfume behind her. Marley let out a long breath the second she was out of earshot. That's the head tilt lady. The original. Everyone else learned it from her. She's something. She's been rehearsing that exact interaction in her head for 3 weeks, I guarantee it. Marley rubbed her temple. Sorry. I should have warned you about her specifically. It's fine. I can handle mothers who evaluate men like building inspectors. That's a very specific skill to have. I fix houses for a living. I've met her type before, just usually about drywall instead of relationships. Marley almost laughed despite herself, and the tightness in her shoulders eased half a degree. And for the rest of the rehearsal dinner, I made it a personal mission to keep it that way, cracking jokes low enough that only she could hear them, refilling her water glass before she noticed it was empty, generally doing every small, quiet thing a good boyfriend would do without having to think about whether it counted as performance or not. We watched her dance from the edge of the barn, laughing with women she barely knew, spinning under the string lights with her dress catching the glow. She looked lighter than I'd seen her in months. Whatever this weekend was doing to her, it was working. That was the thing about pretending. Sometimes you get so good at it you forget which parts are real. Later that night, back in the hotel room, Marley collapsed onto the bed still in her dress, kicking her shoes off one at a time across the room. I danced with 4 different people who used to think Grant and I would end up married, she announced to the ceiling. 4. And every single one of them told me how good I looked. You do look good. She turned her head to look at me where I was sitting on the edge of the bed, unlacing my boots. You're supposed to say that. You're my fake boyfriend. I'd say it either way. The room went quiet in a way it hadn't before. Marley pushed herself up on one elbow, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Nate. Yeah, thank you for doing this. I know it's ridiculous. It's not ridiculous. It's a little ridiculous. Okay, I said, finally cracking a smile. It's a little ridiculous. But I don't mind ridiculous when it's you. Something passed between us then, quick and warm, gone before either of us could name it. Marley cleared her throat and flopped back onto the pillow. We should sleep, she said. Big day tomorrow. Wedding, more pity looks to survive, more fake boyfriending required. I'm very committed to the role. I noticed. The boyfriend line was smooth, almost too smooth. Years of dormant talent, I said, lying down on my side of the bed, putting careful distance between us that felt, for the first time in 3 years of friendship, deliberate and difficult. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay there listening to her breathing even out beside me, close enough to feel the warmth coming off her skin, and thought about how loaded that word boyfriend had felt in my mouth. How it hadn't felt like a costume. It had felt like trying on something that fit. Around 2 in the morning, Marley shifted in her sleep and mumbled something I didn't catch, then rolled over and pressed her face into my shoulder like it was the most natural pillow in the world. I lay perfectly still for a long time after that, staring at the ceiling, doing the math on exactly how much trouble I was in. A lot, it turned out. An enormous, structurally unsound amount of trouble, the kind you can't shore up with a few extra beams and a prayer. The next morning arrived early, sunlight slicing through a gap in the curtains, and Marley woke up first, discovering the position we'd ended up in with a small, startled noise. "Oh," she said, going very still against my chest. Okay. This happened." "Morning," I said, doing my best impression of a man who had not spent the entire night cataloging every point of contact between us like it was a structural inspection. "I don't even remember moving," she said, pushing up onto one elbow, hair a wild tangle around her face. "I promise I wasn't, like, orchestrating a cuddle. This was unplanned." "I believe you. Mostly because if you'd planned it, there would have been a napkin involved." She laughed, swatting my arm, and rolled away to sit up, and something in me missed the warmth immediately, an ache I filed away under things I was not currently equipped to examine. "Big day," she said, stretching, apparently choosing to move past the moment entirely. "Wedding starts at 2. We should get breakfast. I need caffeine before I can survive watching my ex get married. I'll get us coffee. You get ready. You're a good fake boyfriend, Nate Calloway. I keep telling you, I take the role seriously." Downstairs, the hotel restaurant was already filling up with wedding guests in various stages of dress, some in robes, some fully done up, all of them nursing coffee like it was medicine. I got 2 cups and a plate of pastries and carried them back up, and when I walked back into the room, Marley was standing in front of the mirror in her slip, holding up 2 different dresses, frowning at both like they'd personally wronged her. "Which one says thriving?" she asked without turning around. "And which one says I definitely cried in my car on the way here?" "The blue one says thriving. The green one says I have my life together, and also I look incredible, which is a slightly different message." "I'm wearing the green one, then." "Good choice." She caught my eye in the mirror, something warm passing between us, and for a second neither of us said anything. Just stood there in the quiet hotel room with coffee going cold on the dresser, and an entire day of pretending stretched out ahead of us like a long, complicated road. "Nate," she said eventually, turning to face me properly. "Yeah, thank you. Again. I know I already said it, but I mean it. I don't think I could have walked into that barn last night without you standing next to me. You could have. You're tougher than you give yourself credit for. Maybe. But I'm glad I didn't have to find out." She crossed the room and hugged me, quick and warm, and I held on maybe half a second longer than a strictly platonic hug required. And if she noticed, she didn't say anything about it, just pulled back and disappeared into the bathroom to finish getting ready, leaving me standing there in the middle of the room with my heart, doing something it had no business doing at 8 in the morning before a wedding that wasn't even mine. The wedding itself happened that afternoon under a white arch dripping with greenery, the mountains stacked blue and hazy behind it. Marley sat beside me in the 3rd row, her hand resting on my knee, and I spent most of the ceremony not watching the bride walk down the aisle, and instead watching the side of Marley's face, the careful composure she wore like armor. When Grant said his vows, something in her jaw tightened. I reached over and covered her hand with mine, and she turned it over, lacing our fingers together, gripping tight. Fake, I reminded myself. This is fake. My hand did not get that memo, apparently, because it held on just as tight back. At one point during the ceremony, the officiant asked everyone to bow their heads for a moment of reflection, and in the quiet, Marley leaned over just far enough to whisper against my ear. "I'm okay," she said, so softly I almost missed it, like she was reassuring herself as much as me. "I know," I whispered back. "You're doing great. You're gripping my hand like you think I'm going to bolt. Are you going to bolt?" "Not anymore." She squeezed my fingers once, and something about the certainty in that small gesture settled a knot in my chest I hadn't realized was there. When the officiant finally pronounced Grant and his new bride married, and the crowd rose to applaud, Marley clapped along with everyone else. And if her smile looked a little tight around the edges, I was the only one close enough to notice, and I made sure my arm stayed around her the rest of the way out of the ceremony space. The reception happened in the same barn, transformed again, tables cleared for dancing. The band swapped for a DJ who leaned hard into songs about being young and reckless. We danced twice, slow, my hand at her waist, hers at my shoulder, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something like citrus and rain. "You're staring," she murmured against my ear. "I'm supposed to be staring. I'm the boyfriend." "Right." She pulled back slightly to look at me, and her eyes had gone soft in a way that had nothing to do with performance. "Right. The boyfriend." We didn't say anything else for a while. We just swayed there under the lights, and I let myself believe, just for the length of one song, that this was real. Somewhere around the second song, Marley's cousin Ren appeared at the edge of the dance floor, arms crossed, watching us with the sharp, appraising look of a woman who did not believe a single thing she was seeing. "You two are new," Ren said, the second the song ended, and we drifted off toward the drinks table. "Marley's never mentioned a Nate before. Not once. Not in 3 years of family group chats. We kept it low-key," Marley said, reaching for a glass of lemonade with the practiced ease of a woman who had clearly anticipated this exact conversation. "You know how it is." "I know how it is when something's fake," Ren said, not unkindly, just matter of fact, the way only family can be. "I've watched enough of your relationships to know your tells, March. You're doing the thing with your left thumb." Marley's thumb, which had been rubbing anxious circles against the base of the lemonade glass, went suddenly still. "I don't have a thumb thing." "You've had a thumb thing since we were 12. Ren looked at me, assessing, not unfriendly, but not exactly warm either. "So what's the real story? And don't give me the best friends who realized line. I've heard 3 different versions of it already tonight, and they don't match." I glanced at Marley, who looked, for the first time all evening, genuinely rattled. I decided, on the spot, to do the thing I was apparently best at this entire weekend, which was say something a little too honest and hope it landed as charming instead of alarming. "The real story," I said, "is that I've known your cousin for 3 years, and somewhere in there I stopped being able to imagine my life without her in it, and I only worked up the nerve to say something about it recently. That's the whole story. No lightning bolt, just a slow, stupid, obvious thing that took me way too long to notice." Ren studied me for a long moment, something in her expression softening incrementally. Beside me, Marley had gone very quiet, watching me with an expression I couldn't read and didn't have time to examine, because Ren spoke again before either of us could recover. Ren said. "Okay, that one I believe." She took a sip of her drink, glancing between us one more time. "You've got a good one here, March. Don't mess it up." She wandered off toward the bar, leaving the two of us standing there in a silence that felt heavier than it should have, given that everything I'd just said had technically been in service of the lie. "That was good," Marley said finally, voice a little unsteady. "Really good. You should write vows for a living instead of decks." I panicked, I said, which was true, though not for the reasons she probably assumed. She had that look. The spreadsheet look you warned me about. That was Diane's look. Ren's look is different. Ren's look means she's deciding whether to like you. Marley glanced toward the bar where her cousin had disappeared. For the record, she liked you. Good. One family member down. There's about 14 more to go before the reception's over. I've got a truck full of confidence and no self-preservation instinct. Bring them on. Marley laughed, and the sound loosened something in my chest that had gone tight during the entire exchange with Ren, mostly because some small, stupid part of me had meant every word I'd said, and saying it out loud, even under the cover of pretending, had felt dangerously close to relief. It was near the end of the night, after cake and toasts and one uncomfortable speech from Grant's brother about old flames finding their way, that things started to shift. Marley excused herself to the restroom, and I found myself standing near the bar with a bottle of water, watching the crowd thin. That was when Grant appeared beside me. 2 drinks in, tie loosened, wearing the specific looseness of a man deciding to say something he shouldn't. "So how long?" he said, without preamble. "How long what?" "You and Marley." Real answer. Not the party answer. I considered lying. I considered telling him it was none of his business, which would have been true and satisfying. Instead, I found myself saying, "Longer than you'd think." Grant nodded slowly, looking out at the dance floor where Marley had reappeared, laughing with one of the bridesmaids. "She looks happy." "She is." "Good," he said, and for a second I thought that might be the end of it. Then he added, quieter, "I used to think I knew exactly what she needed. Turns out I was wrong about most of it." I didn't answer that. I didn't know him an answer. "Take care of her," Grant said finally, and walked back toward his new wife, leaving me standing there with a strange, unsettled feeling in my chest that had nothing to do with jealousy and everything to do with the sudden, terrifying clarity that I wanted exactly what he'd just described. Taking care of her. Not pretending to. Actually doing it. I stood there a while longer after he left, watching the crowd shift and sway under the string lights, watching Marley laugh at something one of the bridesmaids said, her whole face lit up in a way that had nothing performative about it at all. I thought about the last 3 years, the drill she never returned, the plant she'd cried over, the porch during the storm, all of it stacking up in front of me like evidence I'd been ignoring on purpose. I thought about how easy this weekend had been, how none of it had felt like acting, not the hand-holding, not the dancing, not the quiet moments in the hotel room where we talked about nothing and everything until one of us fell asleep mid-sentence. I finished my water and told myself, one more time, that none of it meant anything beyond friendship, that I was simply a good actor playing a convincing role for a woman I cared about. I had gotten fairly good at lying to myself over the years. This particular lie, though, was about to run out of road. That should have been my sign. It wasn't. Because the next morning, over rubbery hotel eggs and lukewarm coffee, Marley brought up the ending of things, and I, like an idiot, agreed with her. "So we should probably talk about the exit strategy," she said, stirring her coffee without drinking it. "Exit strategy. For us. The fake US. We can't just fade out quietly. People will ask questions for months. My mom will interrogate me at every holiday. It's better if we have a clean ending. Something people witness so nobody keeps asking." I should have told her right then that I didn't want a clean ending. That somewhere between the rehearsal dinner and the dance floor, the fake part had stopped feeling fake to me, and I wasn't sure I could go back to being just her neighbor who occasionally fixed her leaky faucet. Instead, because I am, apparently, a coward with a very impressive toolkit, I said, "Makes sense. Rip the bandage off before we leave." "Exactly." She looked relieved, which stung more than it should have. "There's a goodbye brunch this morning. Half the wedding party will be there. If we, I don't know, have a low-key breakup there, it'll spread through the group chat by lunch, and nobody will bother us about it again." Efficient. I try. She finally took a sip of her coffee, grimacing at the temperature. "You don't mind? Pretending to break up with me?" "I don't mind," I lied, and felt something in my chest crack quietly down the middle. We planned it like a heist. Low drama. No scene. Just a quiet acknowledgement in front of the right people that things hadn't worked out, phrased gently enough that nobody would push for details. Marley wrote out a rough script on a napkin like this was a business transaction, which, in fairness, it kind of was. The goodbye brunch happened on the resort's back patio, white tablecloths, mimosas, the mountains doing their scenic thing in the background like they had no idea they were about to witness a small personal catastrophe. 11 people sat scattered around 2 long tables. Marley and I sat at the end of one, and about 20 minutes in, right after somebody asked how long we'd been together, and Marley gave me a look, we did it. I stood up first, because that had been the plan, the guy delivering the news, so it looked mutual, but decided, calm. Actually, I said, loud enough for the nearby table to catch it naturally. Not so loud it looked staged. We wanted to mention, since people will probably wonder. Marley and I are over. The words came out clean, practiced, and they felt like swallowing glass. A ripple went through the table, quiet surprise, a few sympathetic murmurs, someone saying, "Oh no, what happened?" in the tone people use when they don't actually want the real answer. "It's amicable," Marley said quickly, exactly on script, her voice bright and a little too controlled. "We're still friends. It's totally fine." "Totally fine," I echoed, and it was the worst lie I had ever told. Worse than any lie I'd told a client about a completed project. Worse than any lie I'd told my mother about eating vegetables. And that was the exact moment Derek Voss, best man, 6'2", teeth like a toothpaste commercial, leaned over from the next table, put his hand flat on Marley's shoulder, and said, "Well, that's a shame. I always thought you were too interesting for a guy in flannel." He said it with a grin. A joke. Harmless, probably, in any other universe. In this one, something in me went very, very still. His hand stayed there a beat too long. Marley laughed, a small surprised sound, and didn't immediately shrug him off, and I watched the whole thing happen in slow motion like a building coming down, the kind you see coming and still can't stop. I had just said the words were over out loud, in public, to a table full of witnesses. I had no right to feel what I was feeling. I had built the entire situation myself, hammered every nail into that particular coffin with my own hands. And still, watching another man's hand rest on Marley's shoulder in the space I had just voluntarily vacated, I understood with total, devastating clarity that I had never actually wanted to be over anything. I wanted to grab that hand and remove it, calmly, like a man defusing something. I wanted to say something petty and territorial that I would have been embarrassed by in any calmer moment. Instead, I stood there, frozen, holding a mimosa I didn't remember picking up, watching Derek Voss lean in and say something that made Marley laugh again. And I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in 3 years crack fully open in my chest. Marley must have felt me go rigid beside her, because she glanced over, and whatever she saw on my face made her own expression shift, quick and uncertain. "Nate," she said quietly, under the table noise. "You okay?" "Fine," I said, in the same tone I'd used to announce our fake breakup 30 seconds earlier, which is to say, not remotely fine. Derek, oblivious, or maybe not oblivious at all, kept talking, something about a golf trip he was planning, angling his chair a few degrees closer to Marley's. She answered him politely, the way you answer someone at a party you don't know well, but she kept glancing back at me, like she was trying to read a language she'd suddenly forgotten. I excused myself before I did something stupid. I walked down toward the edge of the patio where it dropped off into a view of the valley, gripping the wooden railing hard enough that my knuckles went white. I heard footsteps behind me a few minutes later. I didn't need to turn around to know it was her. "Hey," Marley said, coming to stand beside me, close but not touching. "That was weird back there." "Which part?" "You." Going full statue the second Derek touched my shoulder. I kept my eyes on the mountains. "I didn't go full statue. You went completely rigid, Nate. I've seen you calmer during actual emergencies. Remember the flooded basement? You were more relaxed during the flooded basement. That's different." "How is that different?" I turned to look at her then, and whatever was on my face must have been loud, because her teasing expression faltered. "Because the flooded basement wasn't a guy putting his hand on you 30 seconds after I told a table full of people we were over," I said, and the words came out rougher than I meant them to, more honest than I'd planned on being. Marley went very still. Nate, I know, I said, dragging a hand down my face. I know how that sounds. I know I don't have any right to feel like that. I'm the one who said we were over. I said it, out loud, on purpose, following the plan we made. Then why did you look like you wanted to throw Derek off the patio? I stared at her for a long moment, and something in me, something that had been carefully built and reinforced over 3 years, gave out completely. Because I didn't want to say it, I said. I said the words because that was the plan, and I am apparently the kind of coward who follows through on a bad plan just to avoid an honest conversation. But I didn't want to say it, Marley. I have not, for one single day of this entire weekend, felt like I was pretending. The patio noise seemed to fall away behind us. Somewhere back at the tables, someone laughed loudly at something, but it sounded distant, unimportant. Marley's mouth opened slightly. What are you saying? I'm saying the boyfriend thing wasn't fake for me, I said, and once the words started they wouldn't stop, 3 years of careful containment finally failing all at once. I'm saying I have spent 3 years standing in your kitchen fixing your sink and telling myself it was just friendship, and this weekend, I got to hold your hand in public and call you mine, and it was the easiest thing I have ever done, because some stupid part of me has wanted it to be true since before I even let myself notice. Marley's eyes filled, bright and startled. Nate, you don't have to say anything, I said quickly, the panic of having said too much catching up to me. I know this is a mess. I know I picked the worst possible moment, right after a fake breakup at your ex's wedding, with your family probably still watching us from the buffet table. I'm not asking you for anything. I just needed you to know that Derek putting his hand on your shoulder made me want to do something I would have regretted, and that's not a reaction you get to a friend. Nate, she said again, and this time there was something different in her voice, something unsteady and hopeful. Can I talk now? Yeah. Sorry. Go. She let out a shaky laugh, wiping quickly under her eyes. You are the worst secret keeper I have ever met in my life. That's not exactly the response I was expecting. I'm getting there. She took a breath, stepping closer, close enough that I could see the fine gold flecks in her eyes that I definitely noticed before and definitely never allowed myself to think about. I wrote our exit strategy on a napkin, Nate. Do you know why I wrote it on a napkin instead of just saying it out loud to you the way a normal person would? Because you like napkins? Because if I looked at you and said the words out loud, I was scared I'd start crying, and I couldn't figure out why, because it wasn't supposed to be a real breakup. It was fake. It shouldn't have felt like anything, and it felt like everything. My chest, already cracked open, split the rest of the way. Marley, I told myself the whole weekend that I was imagining things, she went on, words tumbling out faster now, like she'd been holding them the same way I had. That the hand-holding felt normal because we're close, that the dancing felt like something because of the wine, that watching you talk to Grant last night and looking so calm and steady made my chest feel tight because of nerves about the wedding. I made up excuses for every single feeling all weekend. And then you stood up and said we were over, and it felt like someone reached into my ribs and pulled something out. And then Derek put his hand on your shoulder. And then Derek put his hand on my shoulder, she agreed. And I laughed at his stupid golf joke because I didn't know what else to do. And the entire time I was thinking, why does this feel wrong? Why does this feel like the wrong hand is touching me? I reached out slowly, giving her every chance to step back, the way I would have given anyone a fair warning before doing something that couldn't be undone. My hand found her shoulder, right where Derek's had been 30 seconds and an entire emotional excavation earlier. Better? I asked, voice rough. Her breath caught. Much better. I need to be clear about something, I said, because I don't want there to be any confusion left standing on this patio. Please, be clear. I am begging you to be clear. I don't want to go back to fake anything. I don't want to be your fake boyfriend, and I definitely don't want to be your fake ex. I want the real, complicated, terrifying version, where I get to hold your hand because I want to, not because we scripted it. Where if some guy in a good suit puts a hand on your shoulder, I get to be annoyed about it honestly, as your actual boyfriend, instead of standing there pretending I have no right to feel anything. Marley stared at me, tears finally slipping free, though she was smiling too, the kind of smile that made the whole patio feel warmer. "That was a very good speech for a man who builds decks for a living," she said. "I've been rehearsing it internally for approximately 3 years. You could have led with that instead of the 10-minute fake dating scheme." In my defense, I didn't know the fake dating scheme was going to work this well. She laughed, wet and real, and closed the last bit of distance between us, wrapping her arms around my neck the way she had the night I first said yes to all of this. For the record, she murmured against my jaw, "I choose the real, complicated, terrifying version too." Yeah, I have chosen it for a while, actually. I just wrote it on a napkin instead of saying it, because apparently we're both cowards with excellent penmanship. I pulled back just far enough to look at her properly. "So what do we tell everyone back at that table?" Because I did technically just announce our breakup in front of 11 witnesses about 4 minutes ago. Marley grinned, mischief chasing the last of the tears off her face. "We tell them we got back together. Immediately. Dramatically. In full view of the mimosas. That fast. Nate, we've apparently been in love for 3 years and too stubborn to admit it. I think a 4-minute reconciliation is showing remarkable restraint." I laughed, the sound coming easier than it had in days, and kissed her, finally. No script, no napkin, no rehearsed lines, just the two of us on the edge of that patio with the mountains stretched out blue and endless behind us. She kissed me back like she'd been waiting for it exactly as long as I had, both hands fisting in my shirt like she wasn't planning on letting go anytime soon. When we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine, breathing unsteady, smiling in a way I wanted to spend the rest of my life causing. "For what it's worth," she said, "Derek's golf jokes were terrible." "I know. I heard 3 of them from the railing." "You were listening the whole time?" "I couldn't help it. I was too busy trying not to walk over there and remove his hand personally." "Caveman. Guilty." She laughed and tugged me by the hand back toward the patio, back toward the table of very confused wedding guests who had, for minutes earlier, watched us break up and were about to watch us do something considerably more confusing. We walked up to the table together, hand in hand, and every head turned. Derek looked between us, visibly recalculating. "So," said one of the bridesmaids slowly, mimosa halfway to her mouth, "are you guys together or not together?" Because we just did an entire round of consoling Marley. "We're extremely together," Marley said, sliding into the chair beside mine and lacing our fingers together on top of the table for everyone to see. "Sorry for the confusion. There was a small miscommunication." "A small miscommunication," I agreed, lasting approximately 4 minutes. "That's the shortest breakup I've ever witnessed," someone else said. "We're efficient," Marley said, grinning at me like this was the funniest and best thing that had ever happened to either of us. Which, honestly, it kind of was. Derek, to his credit, took it in stride, raising his glass in our direction with a rueful smile. "Well, glad that got sorted. For what it's worth, flannel guy, you looked like you were about to throw me off this patio a few minutes ago." "I was very close to it," I admitted. "Good instincts," Derek said, and went back to his golf conversation with someone else, apparently unbothered, which was a relief, because I really hadn't wanted my first act as Marley's actual boyfriend to involve a physical altercation over brunch. We drove home that afternoon with the windows cracked and the mountains fading into flatter country behind us, Marley's hand resting on my knee the entire way, no performance required. No rules written on napkins. Just 2 people who had apparently spent 3 years circling the same truth from opposite directions and had finally, clumsily, run into each other in the middle. "You know what the ridiculous part is?" Marley said somewhere around the halfway point, watching the trees blur past her window. "What's that?" "I invited you to that wedding as a shield. A prop. Something to hold up so nobody would look too closely at how much Grant's wedding actually scared me. And instead I ended up standing on a patio finding out my best friend has been in love with me for 3 years. To be fair," I said, You found that out because I panicked and made a speech in front of 11 strangers and a plate of Eggs Benedict. Best speech I've ever heard over Eggs Benedict. Low bar. Still, you cleared it. We stopped for gas about an hour from home, and while I filled the tank, Marley leaned against the side of the truck watching me with an expression I was quickly learning to recognize as her thinking something she hasn't said yet face. What I said. I'm just trying to figure out how to explain this to my mother. She's going to want the story. The real one, not the napkin version. Tell her the truth. Best friends, 3 years, 1 wedding, 1 accidental hand on your shoulder that finally made me admit it out loud. She's going to cry. She cries at commercials for insurance. This will destroy her. Marley laughed, pushing off the truck to loop her arms around my waist while the gas pump clicked along beside us. I like this version of us. Me too. I pressed a kiss to her forehead. No nuclear option required. Just an easy, natural thing that felt like it belonged there. For the record, I plan on holding your hand in public a great deal from now on. No scripts. No fake breakups. Just whenever I want, which is going to be constantly. I can live with constantly. We got back in the truck and kept driving, and somewhere around mile marker 20, Marley's phone buzzed against her leg. She glanced at the screen and made a small, strangled sound. What? I said, glancing over. My mother. She wants to know why Ren texted her a picture of us dancing with the caption finally. Word travels fast in your family. Word travels at the speed of light in my family. There is no faster medium of communication known to science than my cousin Ren with a juicy piece of gossip. She typed something back, thumbs moving fast, then set the phone face down in the cup holder like it might bite her. She wants us over for dinner. This week. She's already planning the seating. Should I be worried? You should be very afraid. My mother makes Diane Ashford look like an amateur. She once interrogated a man for 40 minutes about his opinions on gutters before deciding whether he could date my sister. I have extremely strong opinions on gutters. I could talk for an hour if pressed. That's either going to save you or doom you. I genuinely can't predict which. We pulled into my driveway just as the sun dropped fully behind the tree line. Porch light flickering on automatically the way it always did, casting the whole yard in that soft orange glow I'd always associated with coming home and had never once associated with a woman's hand in mine until that exact evening. Marley sat there for a second before unbuckling her seatbelt, looking at the house like she was seeing it differently now too. Weird thought, she said. Go for it. I've been in this house probably 200 times. Movie nights, plan emergencies, that one time your pipes froze, and I brought over every space heater I owned. And I don't think I've ever once walked up to that door as your actual girlfriend. First time for everything. Feels different already. Good different? She looked at me, something soft and certain settling over her face. Best different. We went inside, and I made us dinner that didn't come out of a hotel buffet line. And we sat on the same couch where she'd fallen asleep during 100 bad reality shows. Except this time she curled into my side instead of just next to me, and neither of us reached for the remote for a long while. Nate, she said eventually, quiet, her head against my shoulder. Yeah, thank you for the 10-minute fake dating scheme. I thought we agreed it was the best speech of your life, not a scheme. It started as a scheme. It ended as the best decision either of us ever made without meaning to. I'll take that description. She tilted her head up to look at me, and I kissed her, slow and unhurried. No audience, no plan, no reason except that I wanted to, which turned out to be the only reason either of us needed anymore. 6 months later, Derek Voss sent Marley a wedding photo from Grant's big day, the one where you could see us in the background of a group shot, standing close, my arm around her waist, both of us laughing at something outside the frame. He'd captioned it, didn't realize I was watching history happen. Glad flannel guy got his act together. Marley printed it out and stuck it on our fridge, right next to a photo from the goodbye brunch someone else had taken. Catching the exact moment I stood up to make my announcement, Marley's hand still loosely in mine under the table, both of us with absolutely no idea what was about to happen in the next 4 minutes. The dinner with Marley's mother happened exactly as predicted, 40 minutes of gutter interrogation and a full accounting of my employment history, my views on home ownership, and, somewhat alarmingly, my thoughts on grandchildren, which I answered as honestly and calmly as a man can answer that question on a first official visit as somebody's actual boyfriend. Marley sat beside me through the whole thing, gripping my hand under the table like she was the one being interrogated, occasionally mouthing sorry across the table when her mother asked something particularly invasive. "She likes you," Marley told me in the car afterward, sounding almost surprised. "How can you tell? She offered you a second helping of pot roast without being asked. She's never done that for anyone, not even my sister's husband, and they've been married for years. I feel like I should frame that as an achievement." "You should. Genuinely. Get a plaque made." We moved slower after that. In the way things move when there's no clock running out, no wedding weekend forcing a deadline on every decision. Marley kept a drawer at my place within a month. Not because we planned it, just because it made sense, the same way everything about us had always made sense once we finally stopped arguing with it. I learned she hummed while she trimmed stems at the shop, some tuneless private song she didn't even realize she was doing. She learned that I still talked to stubborn pieces of lumber like they owed me money, a habit she found deeply, embarrassingly endearing and brought up constantly, usually at the worst possible moments. We told the story so many times over that year that it developed its own shorthand in our friend group. The fake boyfriend incident. The 4-minute breakup. Marley's sister started referring to Derek Voss as the catalyst, which made him sound a lot more important than a guy who'd mostly just told a mediocre golf joke at the exact right moment, though I suppose, in a roundabout way, he kind of was. Marley's mother eventually got the full unedited version, tears included, exactly as predicted, sitting at her kitchen table over coffee while Marley told the whole thing start to finish, the napkin, the rules, the barn, the patio. The hand on her shoulder that had somehow rearranged both our lives in under 60 seconds. "You wrote your relationship rules on a napkin," her mother said, dabbing at her eyes with an actual tissue, not the metaphorical kind. "That is the least romantic thing I have ever heard, and somehow the most romantic thing I've ever heard, both at the same time. That's basically us in one sentence," Marley said, and reached for my hand across the table without even looking. The same automatic reach she'd been doing since the very first night at the rehearsal dinner. Except now there was nothing fake standing behind it. No script, no plan. Just two people who had apparently needed exactly one accidental hand on a shoulder to finally tell each other the truth. "Best 4 minutes of my life," she says now, whenever anyone asks about it. Usually right before telling the whole ridiculous story from the beginning. The fake dating. The rules on the ride up. The napkin. The public breakup that lasted shorter than most people's lunch breaks. And every time she gets to the part about Derek's hand on her shoulder, I still feel that same flash of something hot and possessive in my chest. Even now. Even knowing exactly how the story ends. Because some feelings, it turns out, aren't fake no matter how carefully you try to convince yourself otherwise. Sometimes you don't find that out until somebody else's hand lands in the exact spot where yours used to be, and every carefully built wall you've spent years maintaining comes down in about 4 minutes flat. What would you have done if you announced a fake breakup and then watched someone else's hand land on her shoulder before you even had time to walk away? Have you ever had a moment like that, where jealousy told you the truth before your own had caught up? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.